Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Really glad to have all of you on the webinar today. This is the final in our series of Advocacy 101 webinars. Today's topic is going to be community outreach. My name is Kyla Franks. I am the field director at the Tennessee Justice Center, heading up the Bring It Home campaign, which is a campaign to bring home dollars, jobs, and health care to Sullivan State's most essential health care needs. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'm really excited to get to talk with you all today. Just so you all know, we think this webinar will be an hour long. We may end a little bit early today, and there'll be time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the question box at the side of your computer screen. So even though we'll answer them at the end, you can type them into the side at any point, and we'll then get to them at the end. Just so you all know, this webinar is being recorded as well, so we'll be able to send out the recording and the PowerPoint slides after the webinar. So don't worry about making sure you get everything. You'll have a copy of the recording and the PowerPoint slides. So talk a little bit first. There's a couple of people who are a little bit newer to the Tennessee Justice Center on the line, and we're glad to have you guys on. So just so you guys know, the Tennessee Justice Center is a nonprofit. So we're actually a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. So overall, what we're talking about today is just about healthcare coverage and making sure all Tennesseans have access to the basic necessities of life, and not party politics at all. So some of the things that the Tennessee Justice Center does fit into these three buckets on the screen. That's individual casework, training and technical assistance, and advocacy. So for our casework, last year we assisted over 1,300 clients and provided over $6 million in value to our clients. So helping them to get services that they're eligible for. So the types of cases that we'll help with are choices cases and ECF choices. Choices is the long-term services and support program for people who need health care for nursing homes or nursing home level of care. We help with Medicaid eligibility, making sure people who are eligible for Medicaid or TennCare here in Tennessee get the help that they need, helping people with filing appeals, filling out the redetermination packets, helping people with Medicare saving programs to help them cover their Medicare costs, and also helping with SNAP eligibility, SNAP formerly known as food stamps. So we have full-time advocates, lawyers, and volunteers here at TJC, and we help with all sorts of cases. So for anyone who's new and wants to hear more about that, we would love to talk to you about that. We also provide training and technical assistance. These are trainings on new rules on TennCare eligibility, tips on how to make sure people who are eligible for TennCare are getting the services that they need. We provide continuing education for social workers, attorneys, navigators, and assisters, as well as technical support to any partner organizations. So if you're interested in that, we would love to engage with you and talk more about that. This particular webinar is not a continuing education webinar, but we do offer those as well, and we would love to plug you in. Finally, what we'll be talking about today, which is the name of our webinar series, is TJC's advocacy work. So we do ongoing work to make sure that all Tennesseans have the basic necessities of life and improve their quality of life. So we do this in several ways. We ensure that the people who are impacted by these issues know that their voice matters and help them to learn, so if someone is uninsured and doesn't have any access to health coverage, we make sure that they know that their voice matters and give them a platform to make sure that they can make their voice heard, both with elected officials, candidates for public office, and in the media, and at events and educating the community. So we focus on, collecting people's stories in order to help them and empower them to share them as well, to give them the tools that they need to do so. We also do advocacy work around nutrition and hunger and making sure that everyone has the basic nutrition levels that they need. So helping people children in schools, having more breakfast options for them, and making sure that SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, is protected. And also helping to ensure that every single kid in our state has health coverage. That's our Insure Our Kids campaign, and we would love to connect with you about that as well. So, well, that's an overview of what we do for anyone who's not familiar with our work. And we're excited to talk to you today about the Bring It Home campaign, which is all about making sure that Tennesseans have the health care that they need, but it's good for our state in so many other ways. And we're excited to share that with you today and then talk about how to make sure that all Tennesseans know that. What do I mean by advocacy work? So it sounds, intimidating when laid out like this with all of these different campaigns and lofty goals and, so many things going on. But the reason we're offering this webinar series is because everyone can participate in this so-called advocacy. Everyone's voice matters, and it's not that complicated or hard. So you can do it, and we want to make sure that you have the tools that you need to do it and to share this with your community. Because really, advocacy is all about persuasion. And when did we first learn how to persuade someone of something that we needed and trying to get what we want? Well, it's when we're infants. When we were infants, we learned that if we cry or if, we do something, our parents will listen to us. This is an innate ability in all of us who are, we're born human, we know how to persuade people, and so all of us can participate in advocacy work in order to achieve something to make our state a better place for all Tennesseans to thrive. So we're offering this webinar series to let you know that you can do this and you can make a huge difference, even if it feels like just a drop in the bucket. It's when people's voices come together in local areas across the state, all saying, that Tennesseans need to make sure that they have the basic necessities of life to our elected officials and in the media. That's when real power is to change our state. So that's why we're offering this webinar series, is to let you know that you can do it. And the reason that it's not so hard, and we're trying to offer this webinar series to make sure everyone has the information that they need, is because what's persuasive is storytelling. And that's telling your own story, your own personal truth. It's also relationship building. It's, making sure that you build relationships with the media, or, you stay in close contact with the staff of your legislators or the legislators themselves, or your candidates for public office in your area, whoever it may be. That's what's very persuasive, and that can be really powerful. And it's also about concise arguments. So making sure that you just have one or two points that that make a difference, that's what really matters. What's not persuasive in advocacy work is being a policy wonk with too many statistics. So knowing everything about an issue and all of the details and the depths of the issue is actually not very persuasive in achieving a measured end to make sure that our state's a better place. What is effective is saying your own personal truth about what you believe and why you believe it and how passionately you believe it, and your own story with that, and keeping it concise. So just wanted to start with that in case anyone's sort of intimidated of, I don't know how to do advocacy work. That doesn't seem like something that is up my alley or that I have any experience. I want to put all that in there so you know that you can do this, and this is something that we hope that this webinar series will give you some more information, that you have everything you need to know already in you. We just want to provide a couple tips, a couple tricks, and mostly just let you know that this is something that you can do. So today, this is, like I said, this is the third webinar. We had a three-part series. The first was much more focused on constituent contact to lawmakers, and we'll touch on that a little bit today. The second was on media and digital organizing, including social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit today. But mostly what we're going to be focusing on today is planning events, connecting with powerful messengers and stakeholders in the community, and how you can educate your community. So in some ways, this webinar today will be sort of a wrap-up of the previous two as well, how to apply some of the media tips and tricks you learned last week. And if you weren't able to tune in last week, we'll go through a brief overview of those as well. So don't worry, we'll get you caught up. But these are some of the ways that we think are being most effective. And we'll talk about a little bit about, in educating the community, also how to make sure that in this season right now, with the election coming up in 2018, in the fall of 2018, and the primary on August 2nd, now is a really essential time to educate the community and to make sure that all candidates for public office, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology or philosophy, all candidates are hearing from their constituents. This is about the issues that they care about, because now is the time when they're listening. So that's one reason we're doing this webinar series now, and we'll go into that a little bit later about how to take best advantage of the particular electoral season that we're in, where candidates for public office are listening more so than they normally are during other non-election years. So I want to make sure we're taking advantage of that. So I'm going to start with some talking points about the best messaging for the Bring It Home campaign. This is just to give an example of, what we're talking about is, how do we make sure that everyone in the state knows the practicalities and how much it would benefit our state if we just brought home our federal health care dollars to expand Medicaid. If we just brought home those federal health care dollars, we could create jobs. We can make sure that 300,000 or more people had health coverage who currently have no health coverage at all. So we're going to give some information about this campaign, but if you're working on a different issue, if you're working on something that you're really passionate about, you can use the later slides to advocate for whatever issue is important to you. We'll just provide this as a context that, in case Medicaid expansion and bringing home our federal health care dollars is something that you care about, you know how to advocate for that. And it's easiest to talk about, how to plan an event in the context of a particular focus or topic. So that's why we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So why are we talking about Medicaid expansion? Well, first of all, it's vitally important for our state. And why are we talking about it now? So one thing that, is really important to our elected officials and to all Tennesseans is making sure that all Tennesseans have access to health care. There was a poll that Vanderbilt did at the end of last year that showed that health care was among the top voter concerns. Health care and the economy were tied as the #1 voter concerns in our state. So Tennesseans care about this. They care that they themselves have access to health care. They care that their neighbors have access to health care, and that the healthcare system is working for all of us. So this is something that Tennesseans are passionate about. Also, there was a poll that was done in April of 2018, so really just a couple months ago, by Mason-Dixon, which is a respected polling firm here in the South. And that poll showed that 63% of Tennesseans support Medicaid expansion, 63%, and only 21% opposed it. So by a 3-to-1 ratio, Tennesseans are saying that we need to bring home our federal health care dollars. We need to bring those back into our state to solve our most urgent health care needs here in Tennessee. So we know that this is a really important issue for a lot of people, and that there's really not even convincing that needs to be done. It's just making sure that all Tennesseans who agree with this have the ability to be able to speak out and share that they agree. So there's a lot of issues that have been in the news recently where showing how bring home our federal health care dollars would be really impactful and beneficial to our state. We've heard a lot about addiction crises, particularly the opioid epidemic in recent years. We've heard about safety net threats. For example, Tennessee, leads the nation in the rate of rural hospital closings. And those are, the hospitals that people in rural communities rely on. And so all of these issues are really urgent in our state. And that's why making sure that we have all of that adequate funding on the table to address these issues is vitally important. So what do I mean? I keep saying bring home our federal health care dollars. What does that even mean? Well, right now, Tennessee is leaving $1.4 billion on the table every single year. So if our Tennessee legislature voted to bring home our federal health care dollars, we would be able to bring in $1.4 billion into our state every single year from the federal government. So Tennessee isn't paying fewer federal taxes than Kentucky or Indiana or Arkansas, but we are getting less money back because we're not accepting this money that's just sitting on the table by the federal government, set aside, for Tennessee, and we're just not accepting it. That $1.4 billion a year translates into $3.8 million every single day. $3.8 million every single day. So there's just a ton of money that we're leaving on the table that could be used to address so many of our urgent healthcare needs. And that's why it's called Bring It Home, the Bring It Home campaign. We want to bring this home to Tennessee to have solutions that work for Tennesseans. If we were able to bring home this money, it would be a net positive for our state budget. So in previous plans to expand Medicaid here in Tennessee, the federal government pays 90% of the costs forever. So that wouldn't change, and that would be in any plan that's in the federal law, the federal government paying 90%. And in previous plans, like Insure Tennessee, and very likely in any plan going forward, the hospitals have picked up the 10% of the remaining costs. So it wouldn't cost Tennessee taxpayers a dime to expand Medicaid here in Tennessee. It would just be a net positive for our state budget. So that's what we're talking about here. And what could we use with those dollars? If we brought home our federal healthcare dollars, 15,000 jobs would be created, according to the University of Tennessee Center for Business and Economic Research. Many more jobs would be preserved. As I mentioned, Tennessee leads the nation in the rate of rural hospital closings. And there are hospitals that are at risk and have been losing money for 3 years or more. In order to make sure that those hospitals stay viable and those jobs are preserved, there needs to be more compensated care, and that would happen if we were able to bring home our federal health care dollars to make sure that everyone has the health coverage that they need. According to the joint annual reports of hospitals compiled by the Tennessee Department of Health, we've looked at hospitals that are at risk of closing, and there's 13,500 hospital jobs right now that are at risk because those 32 hospitals are at risk of closing. So it's really vital for our economy as well. And as I mentioned, there's at least 300,000 Tennesseans who currently have no access to any type of health coverage. This includes 24,000 veterans. So these people just are going to have no access to health coverage unless we expand Medicaid here in Tennessee. These individuals are below the federal poverty line. So individuals who are below the federal poverty line don't necessarily have access to TennCare, which is the state's Medicaid program. In order to get TennCare, you have to fit into a certain category that TennCare accepts, like a parent of a minor child, a pregnant woman, a minor child themselves, or some people with disabilities. And there's a couple small categories like people with breast or cervical cancer. So if you fit into one of those categories, you can get TennCare. If you don't fit into one of those categories, you can't get TennCare. So say you're a 55-year-old woman with uterine cancer, so you don't have breast or cervical cancer, which would get you covered. You have uterine cancer, and you have a child who's now 20 years old. Well, you're not a parent of a minor child. If you haven't been determined disabled by the Social Security Administration, it doesn't matter what your income is, you can't get TennCare. So even if you're making no money at all in the year, you're below the federal poverty line, or you're able to work a couple jobs and only make a couple $1,000s a year, you can't get TennCare. You can't get any access to affordable care at all, actually. So that's a real crisis here in our state, and there's 300,000 Tennesseans that fall into that gap, who have no access to any type of affordable health coverage. So, and most of those people are working, and so this is a real crisis in our state. In the past, there's been proposals to provide health care to these people, essentially a conservative alternative to expanding Medicaid, and they focused on making sure that the people who need mental health and addiction services, who fall into that gap, get the care that they need. So there's been a lot of talk about the opioid epidemic here in Tennessee and how we address it, while making sure that we provide those 300,000 Tennesseans the access to health coverage they need for treatment and prevention services. Would ensure that we're able to take full advantage of all the money on the table to address the addiction crisis in our state. I've emphasized this a couple times, but won't hurt to emphasize one more time. Hospitals are 6 times more likely to survive in expansion states. So here in Tennessee, we've lost 8 hospitals since 2010. It's more than any other state besides Texas, and Texas is a lot larger. So we've lost more hospitals per capita than any other state. And that's a real crisis here in Tennessee for rural communities and for the Tennesseans who rely on those hospitals. So to address all of these urgent healthcare needs, we've been talking about the Bring It Home campaign, which is a nonpartisan campaign that's relentlessly local with people in local areas taking action, because the people who have a real difference in this debate, who can make a real difference, are the people who are in local areas speaking to their local communities, to local candidates for elected office, and to local lawmakers. That's where the real difference can be made in this debate. We're focusing on intensely practical concerns. This is not about ideology. This is not about morality, in terms of this campaign. The framing is all about the practical needs that could be addressed if we just brought home this money. And our goal is to expand Medicaid in 2019. It's urgently needed in our state, and we think we can do it. And that's why we're offering this webinar series, to make sure everyone has information they need so that they can make sure that people in their community know about it. Or if not Medicaid expansion, you can use it for whatever issue that you're advocating for. So this year is a really crucial year. As I mentioned, the elections are this year. There's a lot of volatility in terms of a lot of people who are in the state House and state Senate are no longer going to be in next year. They're not running for re-election. Speaker Harwell is now running for governor, so the Speaker of the House position is open. It's a very volatile election year. And what that means is that all candidates are paying attention, to the issues that their constituents care about. And we hope that all candidates for elected office are hearing from their constituents that they care about bringing home our federal health care dollars. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but in case people don't know, the legislative session here in Tennessee, where our legislature can get together to address these needs, such as expanding Medicaid, that's only the first couple months of the year. So the 2018 legislative session is over. This legislative session is not expected to convene again this year. But if in 2019, when they convene again in early January, we want to make sure that the groundwork is laid now so that the people who are coming into our legislature early next year know that their constituents want them to bring home our federal health care dollars and that they are ready to do so. So that's why this matters right now. Great, so now everyone knows this is an issue that matters. We know why it matters. We know how our state would benefit. Now, what do? Why are we on this webinar? What can we even do that was going to make a difference in this? So I'll talk about a couple things. Talk about community conversations, just a local event in your community to educate your neighbors. These can be really powerful, even if they're small and just an informal thing. They can be really powerful. I'll also talk about a simple way to make a difference, which is just to host a letter writing party with your friends. And finally, I think it's just so vitally important. We talked about this on the first webinar, but I want to reiterate, meeting with all candidates for State House and Senate in your area. But first, who are the best messengers? So we've worked with a lot of national partners and others around the country. If you are able to organize any of these events or have any of these meetings, here are some of the people who really have really powerful voices in this debate. Like I said, veterans, there's 24,000 veterans who have no access to health coverage and just cannot get any type of affordable health care. So veterans are really powerful messengers in making sure that, the issue is understood fully and who it impacts. Local business leaders, like economic development officials, again, to talk about the impact on jobs that our country or our state would have, the positive impacts for our economic development that would happen if we brought home this much more money into our state. Criminal justice leaders and emergency medical services, especially those who can talk about addiction crises and how, people who maybe had the treatment and prevention care that they needed if they had health care wouldn't be ending up in, perpetuating the addiction crisis in our state in ways that are, getting in trouble with the law or getting into, emergency situations. Clergy also have a really powerful moral voice in our state. We are in the Bible Belt, and these individuals we know have a lot of sway. Doctors and nurses as well. Obviously, these people are at the front lines in providing health care, and we've talked to so many emergency room physicians and other safety net providers who just talk about how heartbreaking it is to come in and see someone and treat them, when their disease or illness has progressed to a point where it could have been treated early on, and maybe it's less able to be treated later, but they didn't get that care that they needed early on because they didn't have any access to health care. Also, organizations that help people recover from addiction as well. These are really powerful messengers. So if you're able to know any of these folks in your community, invite them to your events. Ask them to participate in the meetings with candidates. We'll have a couple of resources that we'll share with everyone in our networks a little bit later. These are sign-on letters for all of those constituencies. So if you know any doctors, if you know any clergy members who care about this issue, we would love if you could send the sign-on letter to them and make sure that they are signing on so that people, that our elected officials know, and the media knows, and Tennesseans know that they care about this. So stay tuned for those. Those aren't out yet, but we'll get them to you later this summer. We also have a toolkit for clergy. It has like a Bible study on how to frame it around healthcare. So we're happy to share that with anyone as well. So I wanted you guys to know about those resources. And finally, the people who really matter in these debates are people who, are willing to share their personal stories. This goes back to what I said at the beginning. Advocacy really makes a difference when people are able to talk about, the things that really matter to them in their personal life. So not being a policy wonk with too many statistics, but rather, making sure that people know that this is your authentic truth and this is what you really believe. Community members, stakeholders can be really moved by the power of storytelling, and including elected officials. So no matter what your story is, it matters. And sharing your personal truth in your story matters, especially in these advocating for what you believe in. So just a general, making sure when you're thinking about an event or thinking about meeting with a lawmaker, thinking about how to make sure that you educate your community, make it personal. Speak from your own experience. Focus on the heart and not the head. So rather than the facts and dates of your story, make sure that you're sharing, what really meant to you when you talked to this person who didn't have any access to health coverage, when you realized that your neighbor's daughter, had an illness that she couldn't get treated because she didn't have access to health coverage, when you talked with someone who, their rural hospital had closed and they had to leave their community because they were worried about, their child with special health care needs not being able to get the emergency care that he needed. Share morals or values. Tennesseans really, there's a lot that we have that's different, and there's a lot that we have that's in common, and there's common morals and values like freedom and fairness that you can appeal to when sharing your story. And then, make sure to make an ask at the end. So I just wanted to include that at the beginning, because as we go through, some of the events and ways that you can make sure that your story is told, I just want to make sure that that's the context for which, you're planning these events to educate your community and to educate elected officials. Because really, you speak with an absolute authority about your story. No one else can deny or argue with it. And it registers to elected officials and to the community that you care about it because it's personal, and therefore you're not going to be moved. So, there's elected officials and community members, especially elected officials, they're always gauging the views of their voters and their constituents. It's not just what the voter wants, but how intensely they want it. And that's because intensity often determines how people vote. So consider, for example, the effectiveness of single-issue voting blocks on an issue like gun regulation, where the majority wants more regulation, but Congress knows that opponents of the regulations are much more intense. So really that personal story, that personal statement of a feeling registers way more intensely than a set of facts or canned arguments. All right, so how do we share our personal stories? We encourage everyone to think about holding a community conversation or a gathering or a forum in your area, and it doesn't have to be complicated. So just having an event in your area where you educate people about some of the talking points I just talked about, or about whatever issue that you care about. If you want to do it about the Bring It Home campaign and those talking points that we just went over, we're happy to send you those talking points and presentation materials. So first, you need to look at a potential venue. Libraries, community centers, churches, and schools are really great venues to have it where you can educate your local community. Again, we talked about who should be a speaker at this event. A lot of the people I mentioned earlier about who the best messengers are relevant, but really it's very powerful to have people who can talk about the very different aspects of the issue. So since it's helpful to talk about it within the context of one issue, for Medicaid expansion, it's really great to have local business leaders, local clergy members, nurses, a county commissioner, anyone who can talk about what it really means for their community. Local people are the best. So in having a local conversation, say you're out in Clarksville, it's really best to have people from Clarksville talking about why it matters. So if you're trying to influence an issue, what matters is what happens locally. It's not, this person from Nashville came in and said this. It's very much a local business leader talked about jobs in Clarksville. And, if you're trying to influence the Tennessee State Legislature, that is really going to matter. It's what's happening locally in their district. That's going to move your lawmaker, and that's where you want to have the biggest impact. Also, people who have no access to affordable health insurance. Again, like I said, about the power of stories, this is a personal truth. And a lot of people aren't aware of the fact that so many people don't have any access to health coverage, no matter where they fall in the federal poverty line. So we really want to make sure to lift up those voices as well. We included sort of a potential run of shows. If you're thinking like, hey, I would love to have an event in my community, but I don't even know what that means. Like, I can invite these people and, just invite my friends, but I'm kind of worried about, what's the best way to structure it? Well, here's a good way we've learned from other states. This model is from Kansas, where they had a lot of these community conversations around the state, and that really made a difference in the debates about Medicaid expansion in Kansas. So you can start with an overview of the main talking points, sort of like how I did at the beginning of this webinar today. And then having those local speakers we just talked about, talking about how it would benefit your local community. Again, keep it local, keep it focused on your area. It's also really helpful when you have individuals brainstorm together and write on Post-it notes and talk together about how your community, would benefit from Medicaid expansion. And then having some groups share what they wrote down. And then finally, make sure to leave with some action steps. What can people do next? If people understand the issue, they're going to want to know, what can I do? And, like we've said, we've emphasized this a couple times, but, educating all the candidates for State House and State Senate about your support for expansion is the most powerful way to take action right now, especially before the August 2nd primary and before the November election. So that's just sort of a sample run of show. You may want to, extend out a section or change it up a little bit, but we wanted to, give you this in case it's helpful. In terms of outreach for the event, if you want to have a local community conversation, a local forum, we suggest inviting candidates to come, but not to speak. So inviting candidates for State House and State Senate to come and to learn and to hear about why this matters to the community, but not to speak. So the thing is, candidates have a platform, and they always want to try and control the conversation, which is important, and they need to do that for their campaigns. But if you're trying to express to all candidates, that this is an issue that matters, it's important to get your talking points in about why this is important. Because as soon as something becomes intensely partisan or very electorally focused, people are only going to be talking to their base. They're only going to be talking to people who they know support them, and that's going to tune out the whole other side. So if you're trying to make an overall difference in the fight for Medicaid expansion here in Tennessee, it's about removing those partisan barriers and talking about the practical concerns of how bringing home our federal health care dollars can help Tennesseans. And that's best done when candidates are learning and invited and able to be there, but not able to steer the conversation to something that's intensely partisan, where the other side then tunes out and they only are pandering to their base. So that's a great way to educate communities. Also, it's great to invite media to attend. Sending them a press advisory week ahead and following up is the best way to do that. I included just a quick slide about that as well, and I'll send this to you afterwards. But a press advisory, it sounds really fancy. It's not. It's basically the W questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. The local media outlets just want to know, when to be there, who's going to be there, why they're gathering, and all those very specific details. And it's great to set up a time, a play-by-play of a breakdown. So the media loves to know, okay, this is the time where I need to definitely show up to get this on camera. Here's the time where I could talk to people in the audience and interview people and ask them questions. Here's the people I could talk to in the audience about that. So we think that getting press coverage of these local forums is really important, to educate to a much wider audience than the people you're able to bring. And like I said, it's just not that hard. You just kind of write up a quick media advisory, send it to them, send it to the newspaper at least a week ahead. And if you have a local TV station, just send it at least 48 hours ahead. They usually make the decisions about where they're going to go the morning of the event. And then just follow up with a phone call. So we suggest doing this. It sounds really intimidating, like getting media to the event. Like, how would I do that? It's just sending a simple press advisory and just following up with them. So also we suggest, to reach a wider audience with these events using digital organizing: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We talked about this in the last webinar, but I know a couple of you guys weren't on there, so I wanted to go through sort of how to use these different social media platforms to educate your audience. So Facebook is generally for an older demographic, and it's comparatively, and it's also the easiest tool for organizing. So we use Facebook most often, especially since it's for an older demographic, and people tend to contact their elected officials or be more active in issues they care about when they are a little bit older. Instagram is often for a younger demographic, and make sure that you have photos if you're going to use Instagram. And Twitter is for a high volume of posts. So the reason we're including it here is, it's a great way to live tweet an event and to connect with the reporters. So I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But for Facebook, if you want to have a local event, there's a couple things that you can do to make sure that your event is spread further on Facebook. First is just a short video. Videos do go further than other posts, but if you're just going to do a video and then post it, keep it short. People don't like really long videos. So just keep it short and then post the video. You can also do a Facebook Live event through Facebook. And if you're having those are good for longer events, so maybe you wanted to talk with someone after the event to get, a 30-second clip of why, they came here today and why, there's like a little bit about their story and why they support expansion. That's great. Do that on a video, and then you can post it. If you want to, stream the whole event to a wider audience, you can do it through Facebook Live. Those really do work best, Facebook Live, for longer events. The longer the Facebook Live, the more people who see it, the higher it'll go on people's news feeds, and the wider reach that you'll have. Just a couple logistical tips. Make sure you're really close to the speaker. It's hard to hear if you're far away, and just practically, from personal experience, rest your arms on something. Use something to prop up your phone. Your arms will get really tired if you just are holding them up for an hour. So just make sure you do that. I want your arms to all be okay by the end. And if you're posting about the event, post photos, especially people's faces. Those are the things that go really far on Facebook, are photos of people's faces and photos of the event. So if you're talking about the forum, post photos. Also, in order to make sure your post goes further, within that first hour after you post it, you want to make sure, get all your friends to like it really fast. And it's even better if they do the love reaction, the little heart reaction on it. If there's, a couple loves and a couple likes and a couple shares in the first hour that the post is on, it'll reach more and more and more people. So that really makes a difference. So if you want to reach a wider audience, make sure you get a few love reactions on your post within that first hour. Twitter, you can also, if you have a Twitter account, you can live tweet the event, just tweet out what people are saying, your speaker's remarks. If you have the speaker's remarks ahead of time, you can kind of prepare a couple things to write, because it can be, you're trying to remember what someone's saying and get it right and stuff. So it's definitely helpful to, have the remarks ahead of time. The shorter the better, and always include a photo and video if possible. To get those posts to go further, use hashtags that are popular, and tag accounts if relevant. You can tag reporters saying, hey, Jackson Sun, we're in Jackson having this local community conversation. Here's what people are talking about. So if they're not there, then the reporters are going to know what people are talking about. After the event, especially if the media comes to the event, and then writes an article about it, submit letters to the editor. So letters to the editor, they can respond to a news article about the event, and it makes, the newspapers know, hey, people care about this. People in the community really care about what we talked about and how we reported on this issue. And that makes them more likely to cover it in the future. Another reason to submit letters to the editor to the local newspaper after the event is just because letters to the editor actually are one of the most frequently read sections in the newspaper. So a lot of people don't realize that, but it's really important to make sure that, you're submitting letters to the editor to your local paper. That's going to make a difference in how your community talks about it. And letters to the editor are really short, 250 words or less. It doesn't have to be complicated or fancy. Just, talk about your personal story and why you think this is important, and 250 words or less, and send it to your local paper. Even if it's not published, it lets your paper know what people in the community care about and what they want to see reported on. So these are really, really vital, especially, if the media covers your event and you want to build on that momentum. If the local newspaper doesn't come to the event, you can submit an op-ed about what was talked about and about your main talking points. Op-eds are a little bit longer, 300 to 500 words, and they show expertise on that topic. We're happy to help you in crafting that. Just let us know, and we're happy to take a look, provide information, provide talking points. So why focus on this newspaper coverage of inviting them to the event, submitting these letters to the editor, submitting an op-ed if they don't come? Because your elected officials read it, and candidates for public office read the newspapers. This is one of the best ways to make a difference in public policy debates, is to focus on the local newspapers. I'm sure you all know who your local papers are, but in case you're new to the area and you want to make sure you're not missing anyone, or want to know if there's a little more local of a paper in your neighborhood or community, you can go to the Tennessee Press Association website. As I mentioned, I'll send out this slide deck afterwards, and you can click on the link in this slide. You can visit their website or call them to find out how to best connect with them. And again, like I said, advocacy is all about relationships as well. It's about telling your personal story. It's about building relationships. So building relationships with your local media outlets is a great way to get them to cover your events and make sure they keep covering your events. All right, so that was all about community conversations, how to have an event in your area that really, is going to educate your community. So those are some ideas. But now I want to turn, okay, say you're not ready to host an event in your community. That sounds, like you're really busy. You're working 45 hours a week. You got a family. You just can't quite do that. Well, you can also, another thing that would really make a difference in educating your community and making sure your elected officials and candidates for public office are hearing from you is to host a letter writing party. So you get together with your friends one evening, and you write letters to mail to all of the candidates for State House and State Senate in your area. So you can talk a little bit about, we can provide talking points and examples. You can share those with your friends. Educating your friends is, don't underestimate the power of just spreading the word to your inner circle. So you can educate your friends, get together with them, talk about it with them, and then just sit down all together and write letters to the candidates for State House and the candidates for State Senate in your area. again, it's really important to invite them to all the candidates in your area. If you're not sure who those people are, I'll provide a little bit of information later, but you can provide, their addresses are on the Tennessee Secretary of State's website. So I linked to that as well. All candidates have to provide their address when they decide they're running for public office, or an address where they can be reached. And so that information is on the Secretary of State's website. So you can get their addresses there, write them a letter. It's just something short and sweet about why you support Medicaid expansion, your personal story. If you're not sure what to write, you can refer to the first webinar that we did, and I'll make sure that everyone has that information as well about how to structure those letters. So in case you're not sure what to write about, that's going to be a helpful resource. So this is sort of a simpler way to make sure that your friends get to know about the issue, and make sure that the candidates for public office know that you care about this. So this is particularly relevant before the August 2nd primary and before the November election, but we think it'd be amazing to have a couple of these before the August 2nd primary. Let me know if you're interested. I would love to help provide talking points and hear how it goes and touch base with you about it. Finally, I think I've emphasized this just a couple times on this presentation, but like I said, this election cycle is very volatile. There's a lot happening in the Tennessee legislature, and it's essential that all candidates in your area for State House and for State Senate are hearing from you, that you support this. That is going to make a huge difference in whether we expand Medicaid next year. And it's important, regardless of party, regardless of political philosophy. We talked earlier about the practical benefits of using federal Medicaid expansion funding. There's just practical benefits of doing that. We need to make sure that every candidate knows that you support it and people in their area support it. So if you're not sure, what district are you in? Like, who are your elected officials, or what district even do I live in? How do I find, who are the candidates in my area? Again, I'll send out this. Go to this website, and on the side, see Find My Legislator. You can enter your street address in your city, and it'll let you know who your Tennessee State Senator is and who your Tennessee State Representative is. And at the bottom, it'll say which district you are for the State House and for the State Senate. So you can use that information about, and this is TJC's address for anyone who's wondering. You can use that information about your district, then go to this website that is linked here, and you can click on this website and find the contact information for your all the elected officials, or all the candidates for public office in your district for State House and State Senate. So that's where you can find the contact information that you need. In terms of, say, okay, yes, you agree, I want to meet with all the candidates for State House and State Senate in my area. How should I do that? What does that look like? So it goes back to what we talked about earlier, who are the messengers who have really made a difference in the Medicaid expansion debate? Think about that. Think about, who really might influence your candidates, and, form a group and then go meet with them together. You can do it one-on-one as well, but it's really powerful to have a group and to go meet with them. And in person is really, really valuable if at all possible. If you do get a meeting scheduled with the candidates in your area, make sure to keep to the point and discuss only one issue. No matter what issue it is, say you don't want to talk about Medicaid expansion, you want to talk about something else, well, that's okay. Just keep it to one issue, and make sure that you're keeping it concise. Tell personal stories. Again, can't emphasize that enough. And make sure to leave something with the candidate to summarize what you're talking about, because that's what's really going to make a difference. Is they have some information that's from you, so they can refer back to it if needed. So we encourage people to really set up these meetings with the candidates in their local area. So what about if you're talking to a candidate and they just disagree with you? They're just coming saying, like, I don't know, I just don't think that bring home our federal health care dollars even really matters. Well, just speak really loudly, and then when they don't agree, just say it even louder. Just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that at all. When you're talking to people who disagree, there's there's a lot of essential values that we can appeal to. So one of the tips that we talk to when, you said people say that their candidates for public office will disagree with them, they're not going to come around to their viewpoint. Our thing is, well, there's a lot of values that Americans share. I can't remember who said this, but someone said, Americans, they disagree passionately about very little. At our core, there's a lot of fundamental things that we agree on, like, liberty and freedom, justice, the golden rule. All of these things can be used to connect with people who may disagree with you, but may have similar sort of value systems from which you can appeal. So focus on value-based messaging. Here are the values that we're talking about fairness. Fairness is something that resonates with people across the political spectrum. Helping our neighbors, making sure that our neighbors have, what they need. That can help you when talking to someone who disagrees with you. Other tips, listen. It's okay to listen to what the candidate cares about and to understand where they're coming from and then be able to talk to them, from where they're at. That is very powerful in convincing people, about your position. It's not talking at them, but it's okay to listen to. If they have a complaint, that's okay to acknowledge, hey, yeah, maybe that is hard, but here's, some real information. And if you're not sure, let us know and we can help, provide other information to follow up. But it's okay just to acknowledge that the other person may have a legitimate concern and let's address that. Let's talk about it. It's also okay to find the lowest common denominator to achieve the result. So, if the person really cares about the rural hospital and their community, but they don't believe in Medicaid expansion because of a partisan or ideological reason, well, okay, how can we get them to support, bring home healthcare dollars to help the rural hospital? And of course, real experiences and real stories. People cannot negate your own personal story and your own personal lived experience, and that's really important when talking to people who disagree with you. What if you're looking at the candidates in your area and one of them just already agrees with you? Or what if all of the candidates in your area already agree with you? Well, don't switch to another candidate. It's really important to make sure that you're contacting the candidates in your area, in your district. That's what's really, candidates care about the people who live in their areas and in their local districts. So make sure that, you're still contacting them and ensure you're reinforcing their position. You can be sure that these candidates or officials are hearing from the other side, and it's important for them to be reminded that their supporters are with them. So don't underestimate the value of that and don't switch to another candidate. It's important to reinforce their position. What if, your candidates or elected officials just seem hopeless and that they're never going to agree with you? Don't give up. So just remember, even if you don't move them to the other side, you may reduce the intensity of their opposition and deter them from working hard against you, and that can be crucial. So really, politicians, they have to deal with many issues, and they're always calculating where to invest their capital and how to advance their interests. And if they get enough opposition, even if they don't change their position, it could persuade them to mute their advocacy or downplay their oppositional stance. So, they can make sure that, very intense opposition is a little bit more muted if they're hearing from more and more people. And if they just will never agree with you, it's okay to, submit letters to the editor and talk about that as well and make sure that publicly you're saying, hey, I was just advocating for healthcare for my daughter, and they said they were against that. And I think that, that's, not what I would agree with, and here's why. And I think that can be really powerful in convincing them to support your position as well. So why does this matter? Why have we talked about, this election cycle and talking to candidates in your area and educating your community? People speaking out in local districts is what matters. That is where, the difference, if there's going to be a difference made in this, ensuring all Tennesseans have access to health coverage and bring home our federal health care dollars, that's where the difference is going to be made. And now is when it's going to happen. It's before an election and candidates are listening. And even hearing from one person can make a difference. Right now, candidates really care about what their constituents think before an election season, and even just hearing from one person saying that they support, a certain issue, it can make a difference in what happens the next year. So that's what we have today. I want to make sure that I get to questions, but before I do so, for anyone who is interested in what we were talking about today, sorry about that, and you want to hear more, especially from a panel of national experts, next Thursday, we would love to have you join us, especially if you're in Nashville, at the First Amendment Center, or the John Siegenthaler Center. It's right by Vanderbilt University. Next Thursday, June 28th, from 6:30 to 8 p.m., there's going to be a panel of national experts who are going to talk about the healthcare and economic performance of Medicaid expansion states versus non-expansion states. It's going to be moderated by John Michael Siegenthaler. One of the panelists is Andy Schneider. He works at Georgetown. He's a national Medicaid expert. It should be a really great event, and we'll talk about how states that have expanded Medicaid are doing a lot better on a number of factors. We would love to have you there at the event, especially if you're interested in this and want to learn more. So please come if this seems interesting to you, and stay involved. I'll send a link afterwards, but we have a call for people who are interested in getting more involved in their communities and learning how they can get involved so they can learn from each other. So people from across the state join the call on the third Monday of every month. We get together and people talk about, hey, I just did this in my area. That was awesome. Like, what have you guys done in your area? So people can learn from each other and from people across the state. So it doesn't have to be just you and your community. You can learn what other people are doing to make a difference. I put our email listserv on here, as well as TJC's Facebook and Twitter. Stay in touch. We would love to make sure that you have all the information that you need and that you're getting the latest up-to-date information. Definitely if you follow us on Facebook, you'll get all of the latest information. So now, if anyone has any questions, I would love to take this time to answer them, to address anything or anything you wanted to share. So like I said, there's a question box at the side. It's on your computer. It'll just say questions on the side. If you pop that out, you can type in a question into the question box, and I'm happy to answer those now. So I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to type in your questions. All right, we got a question about what federal taxes do Tennesseans pay? I can look into this a little bit more to make sure I'm getting all of the specific ones. But I think the general point that, is trying to make it just educate the whole community is that we're paying the same amount of federal taxes that Kentucky is paying. If you live in Kentucky and live in Tennessee, paying the same federal taxes that are going into the federal pot, and Kentucky is drawing down that funding back to their state, whereas Tennessee is not. So I don't want to give you the wrong information, so I look a little bit more into what that is. But thanks for that question. That's great. Are there any other questions? All right. I got another question about someone who's interested in getting elderly neighbors, interested in advocating for their and their friends / neighbors advocacy. Any thoughts? Yeah, that would be wonderful. One thing that, immediately comes to mind is just that individuals who are 55 to 64 years old many times could be those people who don't have any access to health coverage because they no longer have minor children, and they're not yet eligible for Medicare, which you can get only when you turn 65. So just kind of emphasizing that, maybe friends or neighbors who are 55 to 64, those could be the people who don't have access to health care. So there are people who, for example, have worked manual labor jobs their whole lives. Their body is no longer able to sustain that type of work. They cannot work, so they have zero income. They're living under no income. They haven't been able to get a disability determination from the Social Security Administration, which can be very difficult. So they can't work, they don't have any income, they don't have any minor children, they're not yet 65. Those are the people that we're talking about who just have no access to health coverage. So kind of making sure that they know that this is a constituency that's really impacted by this. And I think that elderly neighbors, those are great people to go talk to, go talk to candidates and to write letters and to elected officials. They tend to have more time than others. And expressing that it's hard to get elderly folks involved in their own interests and their friends. I think that, making sure that they have the information that they need, and, they tend to have some more free time. We've had some success in getting older adults involved, and, they actually tend to be more involved than most other people who we're talking, because they have a little bit more free time and they tend to be more politically engaged. So happy to brainstorm with you, happy to think through that a little bit more. But I think, emphasizing that it is people who are older who are often impacted by this lack of health care coverage. Great questions. So excited to have you guys all on the webinar. We'll send out the recording and the PowerPoint slides after the webinar, and we're so grateful to have you guys all on. Thank you so much, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day.